This video is sponsored by VoxLink.
VoxLink is the ultimate tabletop gaming community app. With the Game Finder, you can easily find new opponents to have unforgettable game nights with. No more posting on awful social media pages and screaming into the void. VoxLink connects you to nearby players playing your games, tournaments, and events across your community.
Hey Wargamers, we've had some time with the Arks of Omen detachment and seen how it plays out for Tau in the competitive environment. And so today I want to talk about how the Arks of Omen detachment can be used for competitive Tau list builds, talk about some of the units that commonly show up, and finally wrap up with some suggestions about how you can go about building a competitive Tau list yourself. Now, if you haven't seen the Arks of Omen detachment, this is it, right? It's a pretty customizable build. It basically replaces all the other types of detachments in the Arks of Omen GT pack. So if you're using those earlier chapter approves, you don't have to worry about it. But if you're using the most up-to-date set of the rules, this is what you're working with, right? And basically just has one HQ slot that's compulsory, and then you have to pick one of your other battlefield roles as your compulsory slot. So troops, elites, fast attack, heavy support, Lord of War, whatever you want. You got to bring 3 of them. But then after that, it's basically whatever, right? You can bring tons of other stuff as long as you have that really central portion of the detachment filled out. And so you can bring more or less whatever you want, which is interesting, of course, right? It allows you to spam your favorite units, it allows you to bring what you want to bring, and have fun doing it. If you're playing in a casual environment, you can get some pretty wacky lists just by doing this. If you're playing in a competitive environment, you can get some really honed in strategies reflected in your army build. So it's a really cool detachment, exciting to see it on in the books and on the tabletop, right? And it allows for some previously impossible builds. Like for Tau, that means you can bring Storm Surges without an auxiliary detachment, right? It opens up Storm Surges as a potential thing that you could bring if you so choose, much more easily and without penalty. It also means that there are special character slots for character elites. Right, you'll notice down at the bottom there's 3 slots for character units that are in the elite slot, which we didn't have before, right? And so things like marksmen, which are characters but also elite, competed with just better choices, right? They competed with your crisis suits, with your stealth suits, and so you didn't see them because of that. And so now there's an opportunity for them to exist in the list, kind of as this side piece, as a sideboard. Kind of selection, which is interesting, right? It allows them to have a place and avoid that competition. And that's something we see actually in a lot of different codices where there are these character elite units that just don't get played because they're not as useful as the punchier, more efficient, aggressive, actual units, right? The multi-model units. Those characters themselves are often more of a support role, and so you have to choose between having the thing to support or the support character, and obviously you're gonna choose the thing that you have to actually want to play with. So, but of course, this does almost beg the question of, is the pendulum swinging too far in the other way, right? Think back to 7th edition for those of you that are around then. It was the, kind of the wild west of formations. You could bring tons of stuff. You could, they basically threw out the force organization chart, what we now call detachments, and brought in formations. And that really just opened up the book and it made the detachment structure meaningless. And you got some really weird builds that were wildly different in power level, and so this is kind of like that in the way that you can bring anything you want, but it doesn't have as many of the issues that the formation bloat of 7th edition has, which is good. And importantly, it reduces the impact of the detachment structure of the force organization chart on codices, right? Some codices are stronger in the troop selection. Some are stronger in the elite section. Some are stronger in the, HQ or heavy support or fast deck, right? And so depending on how detachments are formulated, you are kind of set up with, advantage or disadvantage based on your codice's strengths and the detachment that you pick. And so having this universal detachment that's highly customizable avoids some of that bias, which is, I think, really good, right? If you look at, codices that have really strong troops, they did much better under a kind of a battalion-centric game design, right? And this avoids that, which I really appreciate. And so you can specialize your army totally based on your codex strengths, based on what you want to play, based on your particular tactical philosophy. So overall, really cool, and opens up a lot of different options for Tau, because of course we have a bunch of units that we want to see on the tabletop in abundance, and this allows us to do that. And so I've been paying attention to the types of lists that are showing up in tournaments, and it seems like there's a couple of main archetypes about the type of list that shows up for Tau in those tournament settings. But there's a lot of overlap between them as well, right? And so here's a list of some of the main units that we see show up pretty commonly in tournament lists. And so as much as the Arks of Omen Detachment allows for the possibility of bringing some really wacky, innovative lists, we don't see that so much, right? We don't see, really divergent list builds across the board. There's just these few archetypes that we really see. And I think that lack of diversity is due to a few things. One is that, we're still getting used to the Arks of Omen Detachment. We're still playing it out. And so, we haven't necessarily figured out some kind of more out there builds. But more importantly, I think the points increases are really reducing our ability to field a large number of units. And then also the meta just isn't in a position where it's rewarding taking some of these previously lesser seen units, right? So we're seeing things like commanders, of course, right? Commanders, always a good choice, right? And you're going to bring two of them in the Arks of Omen Detachment because now you have that ability to bring two commanders through a stratagem. And you can do that even if you're not playing Farsight, right? So that really, cuts into Farsight Enclave's benefit, of course, and reinforces Tau Sept is probably the choice you're going to be making. So we have two commanders. Pretty much always is going to be at least one Cold Star, and then generally a Crisis Commander. Sometimes there's an Enforcer thrown in there, and I think that makes sense given the rest of the build, right? Potentially allowing for builds that have a lot of Crisis suits and not a lot of troops, right? To be a little bit more competitive in scoring. We generally see paying for Warlord traits, not so much for relics. And then taking prototype systems, right? Because prototype systems cost points, not CP, and so they're easier to build into your list in that way. We also see Breachers and Devilfish, right? Breachers, really scrappy. They have OBSEC. They are fast, especially when they're in the transport. And when they're in the transport, they're also really durable too, right? So they're a really reasonable troops choice for Tau. And they can be pretty punchy, right? Just inherently, but also when you get, stratagems like Breach and Clear in there, they do pack a punch, and that is even more so true now that Armor of Contempt is gone, right? Without Armor of Contempt, Breachers are just that much better. And so we are seeing lists that lean into Breachers or just bring one, there's, again, those archetypes, right? But Breachers are in a position where you can reasonably feel kind of a Fish of Fury type of build. Riptides are making a huge comeback. Generally, they're going to be fielded with Ion Accelerate and Plasma, but if you bring three, if you're going Triptide, one of those is probably going to be a Burst Cannon build. And the reason why we're seeing so many Riptides is that they are durable, they'll stay on the board, they pack a punch, and they have good movement, right? Their movement is inherently good, but then they also can do their, thrust move with the Nova Reactor to, get across the board when you really need them to. So that flexibility, that kind of jack of all tradesness of them, does help out quite a bit. And so they're becoming a staple in competitive lists once again. Pathfinders with rail rifles are also showing up a bunch, and I think that's, again, due to two reasons. One is that they are a source of marker lights. They can have some high-impact shooting with those rail rifles. Those are just, good things to have in a list in general. Their scout move is useful for positioning, for grabbing objectives, so you get, a lot of utility out of them. The biggest thing with Pathfinders is always their durability, right? They don't stay on the tabletop very long. And so that's a challenge. But they are good for objectives. They're good for performing actions, right? For meeting your secondaries and things like that. And in a list that focuses on riptides, right, you're not going to have a bunch of other sources of marker lights, right? If you're bringing riptides, you're not having, like marker drones attach them or anything like that. You're not having a bunch of crisis suit units. You're not having necessarily a bunch of troop choices that could have marker drones attached to them. Or if you are bringing troops, you're probably bringing breachers and devilfish, and their marker lights are going to be cooped up inside the devilfish. So Pathfinders provide you the opportunity to have marker lights on the board in a list that otherwise doesn't have a lot of options for doing that. So that's why I think that they're showing up more, because they do have those inherent benefits, but also it just fits. It's a convenient out for Riptide heavy lists. We also see a bunch of special characters showing up because, again, we're investing in Tau Sept as the primary competitive Sept build. And so one of the biggest strengths of Tau Sept, aside from its just always good Sept tenant, is the fact that it has all these special characters. And so we're utilizing those, especially on Va. He's barely any more than a standard ethereal. Has his guards, has his built-in invulnerable save. He can cast 2 invocations a turn. And so just really good value there in On Va. And we can use him to prop up our crisis suits, prop up our pathfinders, get a lot of mileage out of him. Then, of course, crisis suits are still good, right? They still show up as being one of the most efficient choices you can make. They have a lot of synergy with commanders. They're just a highly buffable unit that has a lot of strategic play that you can engage in, but they are just getting so expensive. And so you're probably going to see 1, maybe 2 units, if at all, in a list. You're not seeing them be the bread and butter of lists anymore, just because they are so expensive. They just limit the number that you can take, even though they are relatively efficient. Still, they're just so bulky in terms of points. You can't jam a lot in there. Oftentimes, you're seeing a build of burst cannons, plasma, and cyclic ion blaster. That gives you a lot of versatility. The burst cannon is better than the flamer because of range and just a good number of shots. Then the plasma and cyclic ion give you high quality shots, but also a little bit of volume of fire with the cyclic ion blaster and the ability to overcharge for some flexibility there. So it's a really solid build with decent range. We also see that paired with a shield generator or target lock. That's nothing new, right? You almost always go with a shield generator, target lock, maybe throw an early warning override on one of the guys. Probably one of them has iridium armor too, that sort of thing. And so they have high damage output, high synergy, just like always. They're just so expensive now, so you don't see as many of them. Hammerheads. Hammerheads sometimes are showing up in the heavy support slot. More particularly, we see Long Strike showing up as kind of the character. Hammerhead, of course, both because he offers really good offensive value on his own, but he also is able to buff units nearby him, and that's a useful thing, of course. And so we see Long Strike showing up more often than Hammerheads in general, but nonetheless, Hammerheads are positioned well because the railguns, of course, are super scary to some of these big center units, centerpiece units, and they offer mortal wounds, of course, right? And mortal wounds both in terms of the single target, but also the multi-target damage because of their stratagem, right? Because of submunition rounds. So using Hammerheads does allow you some versatility, but really is more of a mind play for a lot of different armies, because they'll see those hammerheads and have to respond to them. They'll have to deal with them in some way. And that gives you an opportunity to play the game you want to play instead of playing the game that your opponent wants you to play. They can counter some spam from other Arks of Omen lists in terms of dealing with some of those heavier armored units that you'll see more commonly now. And then finally, Crude Hounds, still doing the Crude Hound thing, right? Seeing groups of 4 for screening control. They're just, kind of there to be a pain for your opponent in terms of board control and just positioning, and that sort of general thing. So, they're not there to necessarily be the damage dealers of your army, but they're more of a supporting role. And so the big question in the Arks of Omen detachment is, which of the battlefield roles do you build around? Which is the one that you're taking as your 3 compulsory slots? Right? And if you're sticking with the kind of battalion mindset, you might think, troops. Right, and troops is certainly one way to go. Right, you can go with breachers and Delvish. You can take some strike teams in there too if you're not as concerned about mobility, and that is a viable build. I've seen a lot of different tournament lists lean into the Fish of Fury build, lean into troops as your compulsory slot, and on paper, I think it works fairly well, right? They're objective secured, they're fast and moderately durable. You can get volume of fire out of them, but not necessarily the highest quality shots, right? And so with the rest of your list, you're going to need to build around that. You can go with fast attack, right? If you pick fast attack, that's probably your cheapest option, right? That is something that is going to give you the most flexibility, because you can take Crude Hounds, very, very cheap units. Pathfinders, more expensive, but if you only take one of them, not a big deal, right? So picking fast attack as your compulsory slots is very easy to accommodate, and allows you to focus your list in other places without having to go all in on those other battlefield roles, right? So you don't need to bring 3 Ripheads. You don't need to bring 3 elites. You don't need to bring 3 units of breachers or 3 units of strike teams or whatever, right? Once you take the fast attack slots, you can do whatever you want, which is very freeing, I think. You can also build your list around heavy support, right? Riptides or Hammerheads primarily. I haven't seen a Arks of Omen detachment in a tournament setting that's done well with a bunch of broadsides or anything like that. So yeah, we're going to stick with Riptides and Hammerheads as being your main competitors here. And they're both, big scary units that can pressure your opponent, like we talked about, right? Kind of play some mind games. They are cost intensive, though, right? You can spend a lot of points filling out these slots, but I think Riptides really offer the more competitive choice compared to Hammerheads, right? Maybe you're going to take Long Strike, but probably not going to see a lot of lists taking 3 Hammerheads, for example, just because Riptides offer more maneuverability, more output, and they can stay on the battlefield longer too, right? So you're probably going to get more mileage out of Riptides than Hammerheads, but you certainly can build a list around Hammerheads as well. And then there's kind of the elephant in the room with elites, right? One of the first things I thought about when I saw the Arks of Omen detachment was, I can bring more elites more easily or something like that. And it just when you start doing the math on it, doesn't really add up. With crisis suits, they're just so expensive. With stealth suits, I think if you're investing in stealth suits as kind of the core of your army, you're giving up a lot for those other roles that you really need in order to have the list function as a whole. So once you've decided on which of those battlefield roles you want to build your army around, you have to fill out the other slots, right? So if you pick troops, you're going to need some punchy durability, right? You're going to want support for those troops, right, in the form of Cadre Fireblade, Ethereal, but more realistically on Va. You're going to take marker drones in every unit because you need the marker light support. You're going to take Riptides then as more of your damage dealing. You can't take them, as you're not going to take 3 of them necessarily, because of points restrictions, but you'll take a couple, and they'll be kind of the more offensive backbone of your list that hang back while your breachers go and grab objectives and be more of the scrappy guys out in front. If you pick fast attack, you need output, right? Your fast attack they're your support element, right? But you can take a crisis block and commanders. You can take Riptides. You can take some troops as able, right? That's kind of a more generalized list build, is again picking that fast attack and leaning into those other slots as able or as desired, and it just gives you a little bit more versatility there. If you picked heavy support, you need OBSEC, right? You can't just have, I mean, you can. The whole idea with leaning into heavy support, right, is that you're going to shoot your opponent off the board. And so that is your kind of plan A, and you supplement it with your more limited amount of objectives secured. So breachers and devilfish, maybe strike teams. I think breachers and the devilfish probably offer the more tactical option there, again, because breachers are punchier, but also, you know, you get the benefit of having the devilfish on the board to kind of bully things around a bit, and the maneuverability of that unit compared to strike teams on foot. I mean, you could also do strike teams in a devilfish, but I would if you're going to be in a devilfish, you might as well take breachers. You know, if you're looking at, you know, one unit of breachers and a devilfish versus two strike teams, the strike teams hanging around the riptides aren't going to they're going to be hanging around and back, right? They're not going to be able to get up the field necessarily very quickly. They can if you advance and use, you know, your ethereal and stuff like that, but they're not going to have the same maneuverability as breachers and a devilfish. And so I think the breachers and the devilfish offer a little bit more of a scrappier option compared to taking two strike teams, but either way, you could do it, right? Crude hounds, pathfinders are going to be giving you support, not OBSEC, but general support, and then you can take a cold star, right? That's going to be a little bit more of a brawler, right? So you're going to want to give them warlord traits, prototype systems, maybe a relic to make them last on the tabletop a little bit longer, be a little bit punchier. So all that said, this is kind of the baseline list that I'm working with for Arks of Omen at a 2,000 point level. I start off with 3 CP. So it includes Anva, again, because Anva is really high value in terms of being able to pump out those invocations of elements and staying on the table. Long strike, again, nice precision shots and the ability to buff a nearby unit. Railgun, of course, burst cannons for the damage output, and then a seeker missile just because I had the points, and long strike with the seeker missile I don't think is ever a bad thing. Then I take a cold star with precision of the hunter, the prototype burst cannon that avoids the wound shenanigans, high output burst cannon because of the volume of fire, and a fusion blaster and a shield gen. Then I take a crisis commander with exemplar of Cao Yun. I don't know if that's absolutely the best choice. I think there's alternatives there for that. The thermoneutronic projector, the prototype flamer, on him, cyclic ion blaster plasma, shield gen, and iridium armor to help him stay on the tabletop a little bit, because you know between the cold star and the crisis commander, we're going to have a fair amount of output, but also be able to boost a crisis suit unit pretty significantly, right? Then we take a unit of breachers and a devilfish. Again, this is going to be a complementary unit in terms of being able to grab an objective. Between this and the rest of the list, should very easily be able to hold 3 objectives, if not more. Crisis suits, unit of 5 of them with 4 shield drones. You know, if I went with the strike teams here instead, I would use the extra points to probably pick a few more drones. I think that's a weakness of the current build. So take a few more drones, maybe marker drones instead of shield drones in this particular unit. The Chazvray has the special airburst fragmentation projector that does -4 to leadership. I think that's a really nice choice on a crisis suit unit because I don't necessarily need to wound with it. I just need to land a couple shots with it. And so putting it on a commander doesn't necessarily make sense to give up the more important damage dealing shots. So throwing it on a Chazvray here I think is useful because he can do a fair amount of cause a fair amount of mayhem, especially combined with the rest of the shots from the unit. Gives him a cyclic ion blaster plasma, and then he's the one that has the early warning override. The other 4 are all dressed up the same, essentially. We have burst cannon, cyclic ion blaster, and plasma with a shield generator. Again, you could go for a target lock here. I'm more concerned about them staying on the table, so I'm giving them shield gens. But target locks is also a very good choice. One of them has iridium armor. And then we have 3 4-man units of Kroot Hounds for board control and your initial setup. Then we have Pathfinders with 3 rail rifles, and then I'm giving them the recon drone, pulse accelerator drone, and grav inhibitor drone. Why take all 3? Largely for ablative wounds, but also, the grav inhibitor drone is a nice thing to just keep around, and the recon drone itself is some more durable ablative wounds, and opens up some strategy for the Pathfinders. I don't know how often that's really going to come into play, but just having those extra wounds on a unit that is notoriously paper thin is useful. Plus, if we have this unit nearby Anva, Anva can give them things like Sense of Stone to help keep them on the board. And then 2 Riptides, right? So I'm not doing 3 Riptides. I don't have the points for it. But I'm taking 2 Riptides with Ion Accelerator Plasma, Target Lock Velocity Tracker, and Early Warning Override. All right, so the main idea here is that we have the Crisis Suits, the Commanders, maybe Long Strike and Anva, maybe the Pathfinders. So that's kind of our central pillar or central core of the army, and all the other units are positioned around them in order to offer dynamic support and grab objectives, apply pressure as needed, and that sort of thing. But the hammer portion of the list is that central column. So, let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you think I, got this right? Do you think I totally missed the mark? What do you think of the list? All those things, throw them in the comments. Let's have a discussion. And as always, thanks for watching and happy wargaming. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. We are probably in the final production run of the Invasive Wargaming model for the foreseeable future, so if you want to pick one of those up, head on over to Etsy and get them before they are gone. This video was made possible by my kind sponsor, so check out their link in the description below, as well as all the wonderful people over on Patreon. So if you liked this video, consider joining our community over there. Special thanks to Shifty, Durza, Everett Keller, Stephen Cowan, Jack and Acker, Jared Egler, and Scott Heater.